to footballgameplan.com, where football makes sense. I'm Emery Hunt, the czar of the playbook, and welcome to our 2013 college football preview show, where today we're going to break down the ACC. Now, they have two new members in the ACC this year, Pitt and Syracuse. So let's start this video off by hitting the recruiting trail to see how well these teams recruited this past offseason.
Once again, Florida State has the top recruiting class in the ACC. You look at some of the talent they were able to come away with in this offseason. John Franklin, an outstanding quarterback prospect out of Plantation, Florida. Ryan Hofeld out of New Orleans, Louisiana, good offensive lineman, but they concentrated heavily on the defensive side of football, in particular, the linebacker position. Now, I know they came away with the #1 backer in the country in Matthew Thomas, but I actually think E.J. Levenberry out of Woodbridge, Virginia, 6'3", 230 pounds, may actually be the better player. I love what he brings to the table, inside pressure, but also has the ability to drop back in coverage. And I think with that type of versatility and the speed and athleticism, he's going to be a star in that Florida State defensive system. Clemson definitely needs help in the secondary. You look at Mackenzie Alexander, one of the best corners in the country, a guy that can play safety as well, 5'11", 185, also has some return skills that makes him that much more dangerous. And when you look at the University of Miami coming away with the big wide receiving prospect in Derek Griffin, 6'5", 220 pounds, that may see time early on in the Hurricanes offense, so you know he's going to be a threat in the red zone. Boston College came away with an impressive defensive tackle prospect, in my opinion. Tevin Montgomery, 6'3", 295, shows the interior pressure that they want up front to free things up for those linebackers. Virginia Tech is another team that loves to stockpile on defensive backs, and they got a good one in Kendall Fuller. He already plays the game like a college junior, so I think he's going to be a polished product going into that program. Another guy that may see time right away as a freshman is Taquan Mazzell, 5'10", 188. He may not start in the backfield, but this is the guy that will help out as a returner right away. The Terrapins got themselves a very talented prospect in Yannick Ngakoue from Boyd, Maryland, very nearby to D.C. And here's a guy that can play all three linebacker positions. And you know they run that 3-4 defense. Here he's showing the speed to get off the edge. Should be a fine player for the Terps. The Tar Heels don't replace, they reload. Defensive tackle Greg Webb will fit in right away as part of the rotation for the Tar Heels defensive front. North Carolina State running back Matt Days is a player that's very elusive in the open field and always seems to make the right cut at the right time. And there's a lot to like about Dominic Zonka McDonald for Duke. You look at a guy that played the defensive tackle position in high school, the strength at the point of attack you see right there. Reminds me a lot of Teddy Bruschi, a guy that can play with his hand in the dirt in certain situations, but will transition to a linebacker and will definitely be a good one for the Blue Devils. Georgia Tech adds a big guy that can move up front for that option attacking Shamir Devine, 6'7", 335 pounds, may even see time as a true freshman. Another highly touted recruit you see right there, Under Armour All-American Dorian Johnson, 6'5", 290 pounds, is expected to compete right away for a job on that offensive front for Pitt. You talk about a player that wreaks havoc on the interior of the offensive line. Wayne Williams, defensive tackle out of Brooklyn, New York, 6'4", 340 pounds, intriguing prospect, staying local and going to Syracuse. The Demon Deacons got themselves a versatile player in Andrew Hauser, 6'3", 265. He can play the 5 technique in the 3-4 because he's very strong at the point of attack, but also could transition to an outside edge rusher because he does have that ability. I would have to say the Clemson Tigers have one of the best quarterback groups in the ACC. We know about Tyus Boyd and what he does on the football field, may even be in the running for a Heisman Trophy, but don't sleep on Cole Stout. The backup was also a very highly touted recruit. Even though it's their first year in the ACC, you still have to give Syracuse the nod for having the best running back core. They actually go 3 deep at that position. They still have Jerome Smith. They have Prince Tyson Gully coming off an explosive bowl game versus West Virginia, and even fullback Adonis Amin Moore is a guy that could see some carries and could start for many teams in the country. A talented group of pass catchers lands Florida State on this list as having the best receiving core in the ACC. You look at guys like Kenny Shaw, Calvin Benjamin. You also look at Rashard Green and even tight end Nick O'Leary, very underrated receiver. So I think right now you have to give the nod to Florida State. I believe the Miami Hurricanes boast the best offensive line in the ACC. You have guys like Brandon Linder, who's very tough on the inside, Seantrell Henderson, the outstanding tackle prospect, finally realizing his potential, and I think they're going to do a great job protecting Stephen Morris up front. Armed with 3 seniors up front, you have to give the nod to Virginia Tech for having the best defensive line. Derek Hopkins is a guy that provides pressure from within, but they're led by James Gale, the talented defensive end, 6'4", 253 pounds, a guy that had 5 sacks last season. The Tigers have recruited well at this position, and it's paying off in a big way. They're led by Stephon Anthony, one of the more talented linebackers in the country, and also Spencer Shuey, Quandon Christian. And if Tony Stewart can ever stay healthy, he's another guy that's very talented. It seems like Florida State always has the best secondary, and even losing guys of the caliber of Xavier Rhodes to the NFL, they're still able to return players like LaMarcus Joyner, Terrence Brooks, still have guys in the waiting like Carlos Williams, so this is still a very talented secondary. I like the special teams of the Duke Blue Devils. They got production last season from 2 freshmen, one that made freshman All-American, and Ross Martin, the kicker, and punter Will Munday is a guy that was first-team All-ACC. Both guys are outstanding players. Offensive MVP, in my opinion, will be Vad Lee from Georgia Tech, a guy that is an explosive playmaker on the ground, but also possesses the ability to throw the football. You know what that means for a triple option attack. And defensive MVP, Kareem Martin out of UNC, another team that does just a great job in recruiting defensive linemen. I think he's going to be another one of these top-flight prospects coming out of Chapel Hill. Sammy Watkins is the best pro prospect in the conference, in my opinion, a guy that's a junior out of Clemson, the most explosive and the most versatile player in the country. The Rookie of the Year in the ACC will be quarterback Jameis Winston for Florida State, a guy that has a wealth of talent at his disposal, and you can tell he has that confidence that he's ready to take over for the Seminoles. I also feel like the Virginia Cavaliers have the toughest schedule in the ACC. You look at that opening quarter of the season, BYU, Oregon, traveling to Pitt. Ball State is no pushover. Maryland is much improved, and they also have 2 road trips later on in the season at UNC and Miami. Now let's take a look at the Wake Forest Demon Deacons. Reason for optimism: they have a talented trio of offensive players in quarterback Tanner Price, running back Josh Harris, and wide receiver Michael Campanaro. That alone gives you a chance at every level. You can add to the fact that Jim Grobe will get back to a more run-oriented offense, and that will stabilize that offensive attack. The offensive line looks to be 100% healthy, and defensively, they're solid in the front 7, and they have the potential to apply pressure. Defensive end Zach Thompson, 6'5", 265 pounds, is a versatile 5-tech that plays and run very well and also does his job in getting to the quarterback. And the secondary is led by free safety A.J. Marshall, and he has the talent to compete despite last year's passing numbers. The cause for concern would be if they become too reliant on the running game and essentially make themselves one-dimensional. And if teams take away Campanaro, can guys like Brandon Terry and Sherman Ragland, can they step up and raise their level of play? Also, can the offensive line stay healthy? But I still think starting 22-wise, the Wake Forest Demon Deacons will be able to compete. The depth could be an issue, but the Demon Deacons do have enough to flirt with a bowl bid, and they'll have to rely on some senior leadership and a couple of breaks to make some noise in the Atlantic Division. New head coach Scott Schaefer takes over for Doug Marrone, and Schaefer was a defensive coordinator last season for Syracuse, and having a defensive-minded head coach tells me one thing. 1, they'll lean on the ground game, and 2, they'll play solid defense. Offensively, they lose key parts to the passing attack, but they still possess the best running back core in the ACC with Jerome Smith, Prince Tyson Gully, and Adonis Amin Moore, and 3 starters return on that offensive line, so you'll see a heavy rushing attack early until the passing game gets its rhythm. They'll have OU transfer Drew Smith competing with Terrell Hunt for that starting quarterback job, and that's the biggest question I have about the offense. Now, defensively, I love the linebackers. Both Deshaun Davis and Marquise Burrell combined for over 120 tackles and 20 TFLs. Now, they're going to need help from that defensive line as there are some key losses up front. Despite losing Shamarko Thomas back there at safety, this will still be a very good secondary. The Orange are strong on the corners with Keon Lynn and Brandon Reddish, and also Rashard Anderson. Free safety Jeremy Wilkes is a guy that's in the mold of Thomas, so the back 7 is okay. So really it falls on that defensive line to do what they're supposed to do in order for this defense to continue to have success. Right now, as a whole, I think they can run the football, play solid defense, but I still believe they'll finish 6th in the Atlantic Division in the ACC. When you look at the Boston College Eagles, the reason for optimism is the fact that they still have quarterback Chase Reddick, who's a very tough competitor, and wide receiver Alex Amadon, who went over 1,200 yards receiving last year. And the interior offensive line is very solid, and that should help aid the running game, whether it's Andre Williams or David Duddick carrying the ball. But don't count out true freshman Tyler Rose pushing for a lot of playing time. Defensively, the linebackers will be fine once again. Despite the loss of Nick Clancy, both Kevin Pierre-Louis and Steele DeVito could push for all conference honors. Now, the cause for concern would be the tackles on the offensive line as they break in 2 new starters. And on the flip side, you look at the defensive line that couldn't stop the run nor get pressure on the quarterback. So when you look at this team as a whole, I can see them being better than they were last year, but they'll have to come up with a few big wins on the road to get to 6, something that they struggled to do last season. Next up, we have North Carolina State, and the reason for optimism for the Wolfpack, you have to look at the skill positions. The receiving core is very talented with Quentin Payton and Brian Underwood. They can attack you at every level. And in the backfield, Shadrick Thornton and Tony Creasy form an excellent duo that complement each other very well. And the defensive line is also talented with guys like Art Norman, Ty McGill, Darryl Cato Bishop, and getting linebacker DJ Green back is also a huge boost to that front seven. Now, the cause for concern for me would be the quarterback position with Pete Thomas, a transfer from Colorado State. Will he get better, or will he be more of what we've seen from him so far? There's also a lot of questions up front along the offensive line with youth and inexperience. On the defensive side, replacing guys like David Amerson and Earl Wolf will be tough. Say what you want about Amerson, he made plays back there for the defense. Defensive back Dante Johnson can't do it alone. He's very talented, but he's not Superman. So overall, I'll see these guys finishing 4th in the Atlantic Division. The schedule is in their favor to get off to a good start so they can get into an offensive groove, figure out the secondary issues before starting a run of ACC games in October. Next up are the Maryland Terrapins, and first of all, getting a healthy and capable quarterback back in the fold with C.J. Brown will make the offense look a lot better in 2013. Brown is a dual threat player, and that'll just make things easier for everyone involved in the offense, i.e. the running game with the talented sophomores Wes Brown and Brandon Ross, as well as the passing game with the explosive sophomore Stephon Diggs. Joining forces with Diggs will be Marcus Leak and JUCO transfer Deion Long, who could have a Cordero Patterson-like impact on this offense. Now, defensively, I still believe they're solid, even with the losses of players like Kenny Tate, Joe Villano, A.J. Francis. Defensive end Keith Bowes is a guy that's going to be a great player, and I think he's going to have a breakout season. Linebackers are active with size, and they all can run. Cole Ferrin is a man-child on the interior, and they also have quite the solid cornerback combination with Jeremiah Johnson and Dexter McDougal. There are two guys that are very good press corners. The cause for concern would be the effectiveness of the offensive line and the cohesiveness of the offense as a whole. Remember, last year they were used to playing with chaos. Can they play with a stable situation and consistency? I believe so, and I also believe they'll end a 2-year drought and go bowling once again this season. The Tigers will always have a shot because they're strong on both sides of the line of scrimmage. Their ability to control a game up front is the reason why you have to have optimism if you're a Tiger fan. Left tackle Brandon Thomas and right guard Tyler Shatley lead a talented and veteran group that protects the talented senior quarterback Taj Boyd, who threw for over 3,800 yards and 36 touchdowns. The super explosive Sammy Watkins is at 100%, and both he and Boyd are looking to make a case for a Heisman Trophy. On the defensive line, 4 juniors will pick up right where they left off last season, with defensive end Vic Beasley leading the way with 8 sacks. Middle linebacker Stephon Anthony is one of the more gifted linebackers in the country, along with Spencer Shuey. The cause for concern will be at the running back position. They have to find someone to replace Andre Ellington, who brought a lot of explosiveness out of the backfield. And they also have some questions at the cornerback spot, as well as the receivers opposite of Watkins. Some guys have to step up their play. But overall, I do believe there's enough talent on this roster for these guys to be competitive, but too many questions for me to pick these guys to finish first in the Atlantic Division. And first in the Atlantic Division, we have the Florida State Seminoles. Reason for optimism, very talented roster. You can make a case for these guys also having the best running back core. We've talked about them having the best receivers. Defensively, they're very talented as well, and they have a lot of young studs that are ready to step up, like Tim Jernigan and Mario Edwards Jr. So from a talent perspective, they're going to be in every ball game. Now, the cause for concern, breaking in a new quarterback, a freshman quarterback in Jameis Winston. Yes, he's talented, but he hasn't faced ACC competition yet. He's going to have to grow up pretty quick as they open up versus Pitt at Pitt, and that's a very tough challenge. The sack production lost with Carradine and Werner. They're going to have to replace that as well. But overall, like I said before, talented roster. The schedule does set up nice for these guys, and I think they'll finish first in the Atlantic Division. Now let's move over to the Coastal Division and start with the Duke Blue Devils. And the reason for optimism for Duke, coming off a bowl appearance is always a great thing when you're talking about Duke football, and there's still solid talent on this roster. They have a good offensive line, very good group of running backs, and they're going to be better off this season without Sean Renfrey, as they're going to open up their offense with a mobile guy in Anthony Boone. And in the passing game, they're going to try to play above the rim. They're moving tight ends to wide receivers and putting them on the interior to team them up with Jamison Crowder on the outside, who went over 1,000 yards last season. The cause for concern, can they win on the road? That's something that they struggled to do last year. A very young secondary with questionable depth outside of Ross Cockrell. So when you look at this team in 2013, I don't think they'll go to back-to-back bowl games, but getting to 5, maybe 6 wins could be in store if they can get a break or two on the road. Next up, we have the Virginia Cavaliers, and the reason for optimism, there's new coaches, new coordinators. You look at Tom O'Brien coming in as well as John Tenuta. Those are two excellent hires, by the way. And the running back, Kevin Parks, is one of the better ones in the country. And a solid offensive line, very tough defense, in my opinion. And keep an eye on freshman linebacker Mark Hall. I think he's going to have a huge impact. And in the secondary, they're very tough there as well, with Demetrius Nicholson, one of the better cornerbacks in the country, definitely a pro prospect. The cause for concern would be the quarterback play. You have a sophomore, David Whopper, listed as the starter. Can he help the passing game, which could also struggle due to the lack of explosiveness on the outside? We've talked about how tough their schedule is going to be. They're going to have to get off to an early start. That offense is going to have to get up to speed. Otherwise, they'll find themselves one-dimensional, and that's why I have them finishing 6th right now in the Coastal Division. Next up, we have the Virginia Tech Hokies, and the reason for optimism for Virginia Tech, defensively, they're going to be one of the better ones in the country. That defensive line is going to be tough with James Gale leading the way. The linebacking core has Jack Tyler. He's a very good player, one of the better linebackers in the ACC. And they have a veteran secondary, and they have a pretty manageable schedule and a solid stable of backs. Also, keep an eye on freshman running back Trey Edmonds. I think he may get the start. The cause for concern will be the quarterback play. You have to be consistent from that position. Logan Thomas has the potential, and we know potential will just get you beat, but he has to put it all together. And they're also breaking in some newbies at the receiving position, and there's also some questions about the offensive line. So a lot of their questions are on the offensive side of the ball, but if they can get off to a good start, the schedule is in their favor to make a run. But right now I have too many questions to put them in the top half of the Coastal Division. I have the North Carolina Tar Heels finishing 4th in a Coastal Division, and the reason for optimism, the quarterback play has been outstanding in my opinion. I'm a big fan of Brent Renner, one of the top quarterback prospects in the country, and their passing game is very solid. Quinshad Davis was an outstanding freshman last year, going over 700 yards receiving, and tight end Eric Ebron is one of those new age tight ends that's going to do a lot of damage, flex as a wide receiver and going down the seam. So they work the passing game very well. They also have a very solid stable of backs outside of losing a guy in Gio Bernard. And when you look at the defense side of football, Kareem Martin, outstanding pass rusher, long, athletic. That's a terror coming off the edge. And I'm a big fan of the safety, Trey Boston. So there's pieces here for these guys to be successful. The cause for concern would be the fact that they lost a lot of NFL talent in the offseason. Gio Bernard is gone. Kevin Reddick is gone, one of the best linebackers in the country. 2 outstanding offensive linemen in Brennan Williams and Jonathan Cooper, and Sylvester Williams is an outstanding defensive tackle up front. So they have a lot of holes on this roster, especially on the defensive side of football. Youth and inexperience at the linebacker position, and they have a very tough opening schedule. They start out at South Carolina. They also have to travel to Georgia Tech and play a tough East Carolina team. So right now I have slight questions about North Carolina's defense, which is why I'm keeping them 4th in the Coastal Division. Next up are the Pitt Panthers, and the reason for optimism, number one, getting Russell Shell back was huge for this offense, as he's one of the more talented tailbacks in the country. They also have a pretty good wide receiver you might have heard of in Devin Street, 6'4", 195, very explosive player. They also have pretty good O-line and D-lines. They're good on both sides of the line of scrimmage. That offensive line, they're moving their tackles inside the guard. You know what that means? They're going to run the heck out of the football in the ACC. And on the defensive line, they're led by Aaron Donald, an outstanding defensive tackle. They have a ball-hawking secondary. Pass defense was ranked 20th last year, led by free safety Jason Hendricks. Now, the cause for concern, you look at the quarterback position once again for Pitt. When will we go into the season and not question the quarterback play of the Pitt Panthers? Tom Savage is a guy that was a highly touted recruit, didn't live up to his potential at Rutgers, bounced around. Now he's at Pitt, and he's going to try to help revive a passing game that's also replacing some key players as well. So this is an inexperienced group outside of Devin Street. So I have some questions about the passing game of Pitt, but I like their schedule. It sets up pretty nice for the Panthers. That home slate, they're going to play Florida State in week 1. That's going to be a huge test. They also get to host Notre Dame, North Carolina, Miami. So the schedule shakes out nice for these guys, and if they can get on the run early, if they can set the tone by beating Florida State, this is a team that could compete for the Coastal Division. I have the Miami Hurricanes finishing 2nd in the Coastal Division. The reason for optimism, explosive talent in the backfield with Duke Johnson, and on the flanks, Phillip Dorsett and Rashawn Scott, 2 outstanding wide receivers. They have the best offensive line in the ACC, and quarterback Stephen Morris got better at the end of last year. You have to be impressed with that. Now, the cause for concern, that defense, outside of linebacker Denzel Perriman, it's a big question mark. Have they gotten better in the offseason? Because this was a defense that was statistically ranked near the bottom in every major category. They have to get better. I know they have a lot of youth, a lot of inexperience across the board. That's going to be the biggest question for Miami moving forward. But offensively, they can put up points, and they're probably going to have to put up 30 to 35 points a game just to compete. And finally, we have the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets finishing 1st in the Coastal Division. And when you look at the reason for optimism, number one, you always have to start with that option attack, and arguably one of the better offensive lines in the conference. Now you enter Vad Lee, one of the better quarterbacks that they've recruited in a long time. Here's a guy that can throw the football, so now that just expands that offense, making them that much more tougher to defend. Defensively, they're moving to the 4-3, and they have the talent to make that switch, and they're actually better suited. You have guys like Jeremiah Adechu, who was an outside linebacker in the 3-4 defense, now moving to the defensive end spot where he's going to be matched up with those left tackles. Should do a great job, just like he did as an outside backer. And linebacker Jabari Hunt Days, who was a freshman All-American last season, and now that they're protected by defensive tackles, they don't have to hand fight with those guards to try to make plays. They have free reign to the football, and they have the speed and athleticism to get it done. The cause for concern, they have a very tough October schedule. They have to make road trips to Miami and out west to Provo, Utah to take on BYU. And they still have question marks in the secondary. Have they really solved those issues back there on the back end of their defense? I know they have returning starters, but that is still a question mark moving forward. But last season, a lot of people questioned whether or not they deserve to be in the ACC title game. This year, there will be no questions, as they will earn their right to play for the championship.